Hi, I've had some interesting messages from people recently saying that they're writing their own music and they're able to get some melody together and get some chords together, but they're feeling that their chord writing is just a little bit plain, a bit bland, could do with a bit more colour, and they've tried one or two things, maybe using some chromatic chords. But here I'm just going to sort of demonstrate three things that you can do just to give a little bit of colour to your chord writing. So, say we're in the key of G major and you've come to the end of a phrase and you're going to write a plagal cadence. So this is really going from 4 to 1 in the key of G major. Or, if you want to think of it in chords, it's a C major chord followed by a G major chord. It's a very common thing. There's the C major chord followed by the G major chord. Now, one thing you can do to colour that is to take your chord 4 and effectively turn it into a minor chord by lowering the third. So instead of just going from 4 to 1, you start with a 4, you change the E in the middle to E flat, and then you go on to your 1. Can you see how that, and here, how that gives it a little bit of colour? So it doesn't matter what style you're writing in, but you know. See what I've done at the end there? By going, instead of just going 4, 1, I've gone 4 from the minor effectively, and then on to 1. And it gives it a little bit of an emotional pull at the end there, a little bit of chromatic colour. So there's one way in which you could use one of those little chromatic things to give it a bit of colour. Well, that's taking a major chord and sort of turning it minor. What about this one, where I'm again in the key of G major, and this time I'm going from chord 1 to chord 4. So we'll just label those. There's chord 1, there's chord 4. And this isn't a cadence, obviously, because 1 to 4 is not a cadence, so it could be in the middle of a phrase. But I'm thinking now a little bit melodically. Say I've got a melody that's going from D to E, and I just think I just could do with something in between the D and the E. Well, how about using a D sharp? So this is what it would do. Do you hear how that goes? Now, what am I doing? Well, you could say, well, maybe I'm just using a chromatic passing note or something. Well, could be. Actually, what we're really doing is taking this major chord, this G major chord, or chord 1, and we're augmenting it. So there's the chord 1, the G major chord. I'm augmenting it by making the D into a D sharp, and then going on to the E as part of chord 4. Now, what you do have to think about sometimes is something we call voice leading. If I have D, and then I add the D sharp, that D sharp is really pulling me up to E, isn't it? And that's what we mean by voice leading. When you hear a note that's really pulling you in a direction, it's wanting to go up or it's wanting to go down, and it's normally wanting to do that by step. Well, here's a classic example. D, if I go to D sharp, is really pulling me up to E. So you can do that. You can change chord 1 by doing the D to the D sharp and making it an augmented chord, but you also need to think about the voice leading side of it. So if I have something going on in a piece of music I'm writing that maybe goes like this, that's fine. But what about if I did this? Suddenly you hear more colour coming about from a chromatic alteration of a chord. Now, here's a different kind of approach. Down here, I'm in the key of C now, and I'm thinking about a progression that might go from chord 2 to chord 5, or a D minor chord to a G major chord. That often happens, chord 2 to 5. So I'm in the key of C, just to orientate ourselves, and I'm going from 2 to 5. Well, I can take the chord 2, which is a minor chord, and then I can sort of majorize it, if that's a term, by turning this F natural into an F sharp that then leads me on to G major. Now this is actually a slightly different device, but it's still a device in which I'm taking this minor chord 2 and making a chromatic alteration so it becomes a major chord before I'm progressing on to my chord 5. Another way of looking at this is to say that I'm in the key of C major, but I'm temporarily going 5-1 in G major and then carrying on in C major. And if you do this, go 5-1 in a different key and then carry on in the original key, that's called a secondary dominant, and there's a bit more to say about that actually. But that's another way in which you can make a chromatic alteration by using a secondary dominant. So I'm in C major, and then I'm using a chord 2, and introducing the F sharp onto a chord 5, and then I'm carrying on in C major. So really this is just introducing the notion that we've got our ordinary chords, what we call our diatonic chords, but it's possible to take some of these chords and make little chromatic alterations. To take a minor chord, make it major. Take a major chord, make it augmented. Something like that, just to see if we can tease out a little bit of colour. If you're going to do it, obviously you need to experiment with it, listen to what works, what doesn't work, and listen to this voice leading thing that I've talked about, so that when a chromatic note creeps in, it goes in the direction that it's really leading you in. So, a little bit of colour that you can add to the writing of chords.